So welcome back. I'm Randy Shield. For those of you that weren't here, I was superintendent in Tillamook for 18 years, recently retired. Over in the middle on the left on my screen is the other half of RS2 Education. That's Rob Saxton. So last time we had all of you introduce yourself, but I think we have a few new faces on tonight. So if you were not here last week, or however long ago it was, last time we met, could you unmute and wave your hand, tell us who you are, kind of what your relationship is with the district, so we can get to know you just a little bit. Anybody out there?
I am Julie Brown. Oh.
Okay, Julie, go ahead.
I'm Julie. Okay, I'm Julie Brown. I am the attendance secretary at the high school. I live up in the Silverton Hills and have for almost my entire life. I'm representing Silvercrest in this group. I am a Silvercrest, from a Silvercrest family. Me, my siblings, all of my children, my nieces, have a vested interest in this community. Silvercrest is kind of it's my favorite. It's one of my favorite things. So,
very good.
That's kind of it. I have three
really
graduates of Silverton. Oh, go ahead.
Excellent. Really nice to have you with us, Julie. The deep roots there are going to be valuable as we start having this discussion. So thanks for joining us. Good. Anybody else that wasn't here last week or last time? Janet?
Hi, yes, I'm Janet Alenak. I'm a board member and have graduated 2 kids from the high school and currently have my last one there who's a senior. So thank you so much.
Excellent. Thanks for your service, Janet. That's a thankless job some days, but really so valuable, so important to what we do for our kids. Shelley, I see that hand.
I am Shelley Nealon. I'm a school board member, and I have 1 graduate of the high school and 2 at the high school now. So I'm glad to be here.
Very nice. Yeah, thanks for being here, Shelley. Anybody else that was not here at our last meeting? Okay. There may be others joining us as we go as well. I want to start today. We got a ton of stuff to do tonight, and we hope to keep you entertained all the way through it and get some things done in our process. The first part is just going back and kind of recapping what we did last time. I'd sent you out an email, but just to remind you again, we had an introduction of committee members. We'd agreed on the consensus decision-making process, and that was a thumbs up. Thumb sideways, I can kind of live with it, or no, I can't live with it. We used that several times in our last meeting. We then had a discussion about if we had to come to a vote, what that would look like and what we would count as a vote passing. And we went back and forth and decided that if we had 3/4 support, 75% support of the people that were there and voting, that we then as a committee would all agree to go along with whatever that decision was. We agreed not to try to circumvent that process or go out and be negative about a decision, because we're all one committee and we're going to work together on this. And we agreed that if 75% agree, then we're going to go forward and we'll all be positive about that. So that was a big piece to the puzzle last time. We talked about public comment, which we didn't have any public comment last time, may have some tonight. Rob, why don't you give us an idea how public comment's going to unroll here in a little bit?
Yes, I will. So we will have some public comment tonight. We think we've got that slated at about 6:45, but the time can vary depending on what happens with our agenda. But if you want to give public comment, I'll read a little bit about the public comment when we get to that spot, but you can use the chat feature on Zoom and request to speak. That's one way, and that would be probably the easiest way to do that. Just again, use the chat feature on Zoom, or you can send an email request to feedback@silverfalls.k12.or.us. So again, it's feedback@silverfalls.k12.or.us.
one of the things we talked about last time a lot was transparency and how important it is for this committee to be very transparent in what we're talking about, what we're doing. That's why anybody can join and listen in on a meeting like this. And this is also why we ask for public comment in the process. We'll have survey results and so forth. And so transparency is going to be critical as we work. And then we talked about the charge of this committee. And the charge of this committee, remember, is to collectively come together and make recommendations to the superintendent about the boundaries and what should happen around Robert Frost and Mark Twain as we head into next year. And so it's important to know what our charge is. It's also important to know what our charge is not. And that'll probably come up a time or two tonight. And that is, it's not our job to revisit whether or not the school structure is going to change to 2 K-5 schools. And that's not our charge. Another committee did that, made the recommendation, the board made the decision, we're moving forward. And so that decision we won't revisit in this committee. That's not our charge at all. Okay, so that's something we won't do, although again, it'll be part of the discussion as we go ahead. And so we really, I feel like we kind of laid the framework in our last meeting, and now tonight we need to move forward. In our last meeting, we talked about different things, different tools that we would use in this process. And one of those we referred to as 5 maps. And 5 maps is a programming system. And we've asked for the district, and I think it was Steve that kind of did the groundwork and worked on this, to work with, I don't remember where they're from, somewhere back in the Midwest. Anyway, to work with them and have them give you kind of a demonstration of what this software can do, because it's going to be a critical piece in our work as we move forward, as we start laying lines on possible lines of boundary within the town of Silverton. This is going to help us see what that actually means and what the impact is. And so that'll be our hope. And Steve, I don't know if they are on yet.
Yeah, Randy, hi, thank you. Would you like me to?
Yeah,
So, hi, everybody. I'm Steve Nielsen. I'm the Director of Finance and Operations, and a group of us have been working with Forecast 5 Analytics to bring on a tool that will be very helpful for us as we go through this process, as well as many other things that we'll do in the future in our district. It's called 5 Maps. It's one of their 5 modules. And we've been working with Forecast 5 for a couple of years. They've been in Oregon for about 3 years now. They work in many different states. They're based in Naperville, Illinois. But many districts in our state are starting to use Forecast 5. We use something called 5 Site as well as 5 Cast, which help us analyze student and financial data, do multi-year financial projections, financial statements, that type of thing. And when this process came up, I immediately thought about getting into module number 3, which is 5 Maps. So Bob Manicus from Forecast 5 is on the call, and he has graciously agreed to do a 15-minute demonstration for us tonight, even though it is already 8:15 his time. So we really appreciate Bob joining us tonight. And so he will be sharing just what he would do for his just kind of a generic demonstration. We are currently working with our representative at Forecast 5, Whitney, to get all of our data loaded in. In fact, it has been loaded in and geocoded, and now we're just starting to learn how to use it more, and we're going to be getting more into that in our January 7th meeting. So with all that being said, I'd like to welcome Bob Manicus onto the call, and he'll introduce himself and share his screen.
Great, thank you, Steve, and thanks everyone for the chance to present tonight. My name is Bob Manicus. As Steve said, I've worked with Steve when the district first decided to open up a relationship with Forecast 5 on the other tools. What we're going to talk about today is our 5 Maps tool. The name kind of gives it away. It's all about geospatial analytics. Let me flip my screen on, and we can just kind of talk through what this program does and how it does that. As Steve mentioned, I'll be using demo data today instead of Silver Falls data. So This is fake data, for lack of a better term. So we're not worried about any student data privacy. With that being said, as the district begins to use the 5 MAPS program, of course, student data privacy is very important. We entered into a student data privacy agreement with Silver Falls because the data that we're pulling in can have any and all attributes that the district selects. So it can have, critical pieces of data attached to it, like grade level, like any special needs, like any student information system data that you might have. It could have assessment data. It could have emergency contact information, all kinds of different student data attributes. So I think if my screen is on, usually there's a green bubble around it. I'm not seeing that, but a thumbs up. You guys seeing a map? Anyone? Perfect. So I'm using demo data from a town in Wisconsin. You can see there's 2,300 students in this fake district. And as I click into the bubble, you can start to see some clusters around the number of students in different areas. Let's turn cluster view off and see the actual student pins. So now you see we've replaced the cluster with pins, and the pins are color coded. So a moment ago, I mentioned you can attach all sorts of different student data attributes to the students that you're loading into the program. You can then display the students on the map by any of those attributes. You can run analytics on any of that as you start to analyze boundaries and neighborhoods and different things as it relates to the project that you're embarking on right now. So let's just talk about that. I'm on this map tab here, and of course the map is what's shown on my screen, but then you see grid and analytics as the next tabs over. As I look at the grid view, this is what kind of the raw data file is that you'll be loading into the 5 MAPS program. The important things that the data needs to have are a unique identifier that is usually a student number of some sort, and something that can be geocoded, most specifically an address. So you can see in my demo data, we've got that student number, student name, gender, ethnicity. Of course, there's the address that I mentioned is critical. And as I scroll over, you'll start to see some other info that we commonly see districts elect to put into this program. We don't require anything other than those 2 pieces, and nor do we limit the data and say, no, you can't load that. This is all at the district's discretion. So, parent, guardian name, phone number, special ed status, Title I status, lunch status, things like that can be in here. Here's some assessment scores. So these are the types of attributes that when I had the map up, you can choose to have those student pins be color coded by. Analytics gives me the ability to take the data points on my screen and run some views of that to say, what's the mix of students? Maybe if we are trying to turn a K2 and a 3-5 into 2 K5 buildings, grade level would of course be important to look at. So I can go and run a quick view by grade level to see of those students on the map, what's the grade level mix of them. If I wanted to do some program planning, it'd be important to know what's the mix of students with special needs, with IEPs, with anything else. I can go. So any of those attributes, you have the ability to run and create on the fly these sorts of visual analyses that you're seeing. So let's go back to the map. Boundary analysis is what this is ultimately about. So I've got 4 elementary boundaries in my demo data: Jefferson, Kennedy, Reagan, and Roosevelt. So as you see, I just quickly checked some boxes, and those boundaries pop up on the screen. We call those layers in the system. Why that's worth distinguishing is you're not limited to your district boundaries or scenario planning of boundaries where you start to kind of move those lines around. If you'd like to create some layers for your neighborhoods, maybe you know that this particular neighborhood, we're either going to move all to one school or all to the other. If you want to have that ability, you can certainly do that here in the system. But to show you the utility and knowing that I don't have a ton of time today, I'm going to make this really simple. So let's take Jefferson and Kennedy, and let's suppose that those are the two buildings that we really want to kind of play with the boundaries of. What I'm going to first do is apply some filters. And in the case of what Silver Falls is working on, maybe I would choose to filter by current grade level. And if this is a plan for next year, I might choose grades 1, 2, 3, and kindergarten through 4, and apply that filter. You can filter by any of the attributes you can see I just did. I think a moment ago we had 2,600 pins. We're down now to 2,000 pins. The other thing I can choose to do is maybe I want to filter by the two buildings that we're looking at. So I'll apply another filter. And let's say we want to look at this by school site. So we'll select school, and it was Jefferson and it was Kennedy that we want to select. So again, I'll run those filters, and now you'll see my student pins have updated. Now would come time to say, well, I want to analyze what's going on in these two zones, in Jefferson and in Kennedy. So I click this convert button. Again, this is just a technicality, but that basically is just turning the data on, really activating what you're seeing on the screen. So I could click into this red zone, and I can see there's 446 students that are attending my red school, Kennedy, I think it is. Or I could click into the blue or the purple, and I can see there's only 260 students there, which would bring me to probably the thought of, well, I've got to balance that. I've got to turn this into two kind of more equal numbers of students. So let's take the shapes that we're looking at here, and let's go and edit those. So as I choose to edit, you see these white bubbles pop up around all the different perimeter of my zones here. And if I recall correctly, the red had much more than the blue zone. So let's say we want to move these boundaries around and do some scenario planning. Maybe we want to move this purple zone up to, it looks like Cross Country Road. If I were to do that, I might zoom in a little bit, and I'll be fairly quick with my clicks here. A user of this would probably focus a little bit more on ensuring that their zones are exactly along the roads that they'd like. But you'll see I'm just moving these up, and my boundaries are automatically beginning to adjust for me. So we're just popping these up. And looks like I forgot one there, so we'll pull that up. But you get the idea. So really quickly, I've started to move my boundaries. I'll just stop editing there for the sake of time. Now I can click back into my purple zone. We had 260 students before. We're up to 317. We've upped our students. If I want to run some analytics on that, I can click statistics, and maybe now I want to look back at that special ed percentage or grade level, the number of students by grade level. So again, really quickly, I can start to run some analysis on what happens if I move the boundary from one area to another. You can begin to save these different boundaries. So of course, this isn't going to be an overnight decision for Silver Falls. So if you'd like to save an iteration of these boundaries, of course you can do that. You can save as many of those as you like. In fact, over here on the left side of my screen, you can see on the layers category, I've got a bunch of different things that are saved onto my demo account. So you could save, I'll use Steve as my example. Here's Steve Nielsen scenario 1, and here's Steve Nielsen scenario number 2 and number 3. So you do have the ability to go and kind of iterate and save along the way. I think I have 7 minutes left. And so what I'd like to do here is just pause quickly in case anyone has questions, comments, thoughts, so that we can best use the remaining time that I get to be with all of you. Looks like no questions. That is totally good with me. So I see Rob, is that a hand raise?
Sure, why would I not ask a question? So one of my questions would be around free and reduced lunch and any sensitivity to data around that, and how is it possible to use this where only certain people are able to see some of the data?
That's a great question. So for 5 maps, we restrict the number of licenses. It's not like an unlimited number of licenses. So typically a district would have 5 users of this program. Those 5 users do have full visibility to the entire data file. But it would be up to those 5 then if they wanted to, let's suppose for the sake of this committee that I'm meeting with right now, if you were to put together some content, Rob, let's say you're one of the users and you wanted to restrict that info, you of course could put together all the analytics and views that you want as if that data is not attached. What I mean is you could choose to have the pins not color coded by lunch status. You could choose when you pull up your analytics not to put that as one of the dimensions that you're looking at. So for a larger audience, for a pre-built presentation, it's as if that data doesn't exist. And for the core users, for those 5 users I mentioned that we did sign a data privacy agreement. More than that, the data files aren't flowing over email or anything else. They go through a secure file transfer portal. And so there's no risk to that data becoming open to the public or anything else. We take great pride as a data company in data integrity and data security.
Thank you.
Dave, I see a hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, a question for you. I noticed that bus routes was one of the data layers, and I just wanted to know, does the same functionality exist with moving the bus routes around? Can you get some of the same, or does it have the same ability to move that layer around?
It's a great question. So this is not a bus route planning tool.
Right.
That attribute more than anything is for if you were trying to plan for, let's say a bus is leaving the school late for some reason, and you wanted to quickly call the parents and let them know, hey, or send an email through a listserv. You wanted to have that data attribute. That's more why it is in here. That being said, one of the things we've seen districts use this tool for is once they have their bus routes, they'll go and drop that layer on here, and then they'll do some diameter distances to say, okay, here's my bus stop. I know I want our children not walking anything more than a quarter mile, let's say, to their bus stop. How many kids that are in bus stop 3 on Route 4 fall within that quarter mile or outside of it? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right.
And then one last question, if I could. Have you gone back to any of your previous customers, let's say at a 3-year or 4 or even 5-year look back, and see possibly some of the changes that have been made in the statistics between what a district decided to do at a given time and then a 4 or 5-year period after the fact?
Great question. So as far as the look backs go, I'm not familiar with us having done a project like you just described. However, districts will often load historical data in. Where this is most commonly seen is if they want to do some analysis on which neighborhoods are growing, which neighborhoods are we losing students. Particularly right now, I know there's been a lot of districts that have been trying to identify where the students are that didn't return in the fall, during COVID, of course, to say, well, we know that we had 273 kids that didn't show back up. Let's look at last year's snapshot of our student information system compared to this year's, remove those that are on both, and let's plot 273 kids on the map and see, is there anything that answering the question where are these students would be insightful for that will help us better understand why we might be losing some students. Thank you. Any other questions? I thought I saw another hand or two up a moment ago. Maybe I didn't. Okay. So let's, I want to be mindful of your time. I'm guessing you have more things to talk about after I sign off. So let's run through a couple of other things that are here. Now, I've kept this presentation very focused on boundaries, and that is exactly what I'm going to continue to do. But as that was a great question from Dave a second ago, the tool is not simply a boundary planning tool. And so as the district begins to analyze other things on the map, things like internet connectivity, things like staff commutes, things like, there's a lot of different applications that you can use a tool like 5 maps for. So we've talked about dropping on different layers and maneuvering those boundaries to kind of simulate those different what ifs. I mentioned that you could drop on different subzones such as neighborhood zones. My neighborhood is called West Haven. So let's suppose I wanted to see what happens if we have West Haven in this school or that school. I can go and kind of quickly apply those filters. So you can do a lot of really cool work. But the other thing 5Maps does at some point, this committee and then the district is going to roll forward with, hey, here's our final verdict. Here's our boundaries. And so 5Maps has a tool. And Steve, I don't think I even showed this to you back previously. Maybe I did, but it's called School Search. And what it is, and I'm going to use Seattle Public Schools as an example. This is their public interface. And so what their community can do is, let's suppose you get onto the Silver Falls School District's Twitter and you tweet out, boundaries are up, see where your students are going to school in the fall. You can just type in your home address. Let's say it's 500 Terry Avenue in Seattle. And I can now see, here's our district boundaries. School A is where I would expect to go, but I have access to school B and school C. I can see those schools on the map. Now, of course, this is kind of a larger scale version. For Silver Falls, it could simply be, I want to drop in, are you going to Mark Twain? And I forget what the other school was, but you can quickly then see with the new boundaries, where are my students going to end up going to elementary school? So you do have access to this School Search feature as well. So that'll be kind of once you finalize those boundaries, we turn this on, and then just like that, you can have this linked onto your district website so that the community can go and visit that page. That, I think, for the sake of today's quick demo, to understand what the tool can do and how it will be a imperative resource for you all in this project that you're embarking upon. That's all I need to show you, I think. Steve, did I miss anything? Anything you'd like me to add, or are we good to kind of wrap up?
No, I think that's perfect for tonight's what we need. So I know that it probably kills you to not be able to show all the other cool features, but no, this was perfect. And thank you very much for coming on at this late hour for us.
I'm very, very glad to. I love the relationship we've had over the couple of years, Steve, and look forward to supporting this great work that you're all doing. You mentioned, and I'll just point this out so the team is aware, Whitney West is your dedicated 5Maps advisor. And I say this just to point out, as you go and are working through the different simulations and work that's going to go into this, it is Whitney's job to support the heck out of you all and make sure you have a great experience, make sure that any of the work that you're trying to see on the map and with our analysis tools can be done. So lean on her. She's done everything under the sun spatially in a mapping tool sense. And so lean on her, and I wish everyone good luck on this project.
Thank you so much, Bob. Appreciate your time.
I'll pause in case there's any other questions. If not, I'll hang up and let you guys get back to it. Great. All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So I hope that gives you an idea of one of the tools we have to work with. I'll tell you that in the old days when we did this years ago, you first of all kind of estimated and guessed where kids were, or you had a big map with a whole bunch of little push pins and you started moving around and counting them. This tool is truly a game changer in time as anything else, as much as anything that we've seen. So any questions of Rob or I or district leadership in relation to this tool?
And I just want to say too, one of the reasons we thought it was important to show this to you now is because we think it will help you get your wheels turning about what's possible, what you could be thinking about, how we might approach this. And as we talk about survey results, you'll see how important some of the different features are.
Okay.
I have a quick question. I
yeah.
wasn't able to unmute myself while he was presenting, so I would have asked him the question, but maybe you guys can answer it. how much do neighborhoods fluctuate as far as changes over time with specific populations?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Maybe Steve, if you want to address that, or Scott. Inherently, neighborhoods change over the course of 5 to 10 years. It's normally a slow change, unless something really weird happens. If all of a sudden the housing price in that area fluctuate up or down drastically, that can cause people to move in and move out. But normally when we watch our neighborhoods, they kind of grow and age as your kids age. And so, kids that were growing up as with your kids as kindergarten students, and there was a lot of them around, over the course of time, pretty soon there's a lot of junior high kids around. And that's kind of how it works. So, any other questions? All right. We talked about the last meeting and things that we did in that. One of the things that we did there was we kind of set up the idea of a community survey. And we talked back and forth about what should be on there, and then generated a survey, sent it out to everybody. And I would say that I expected we'd probably get, 100, maybe 150 responses, and you as a community gave 400 responses, which is fantastic. It means you have a lot of buy-in, a lot of community support there, and people who are interested in the process. We want to go through, Rob and I, here in the next 15 minutes or so, and give you kind of an overview, and then we'll come back and revisit the results of this survey as part of what we decide to do as we move forward. So Derek, if you could pull up that PowerPoint and share the screen. That screen doesn't matter at all to us, and so we'll move to the next one. So we had about 400 responses, and these are the people who responded. 76% of the people or households who responded have kids in the Silver Falls School District. And so that's a really good representation. That also means that 24% do not. We had an even distribution of families or people who responded that have kids going to Robert Frost or Mark Twain next year, as opposed to having kids who are going to one of the K-8 buildings. Now there's some families that have kids that go both, but there's a pretty even distribution there. And I think that's good, because that gives you a good cross section of your community to get feedback from. 26% of the respondents were current employees of Silver Falls. And then 8% were community members who reported they had no children currently in the system. Next question, or next slide. We asked the demographic question. We had some discussion about whether to ask that or not. And we asked it in a very benign way. We said, look, if you want to tell us anything about yourself, your family, as far as race, ethnicity, things like that, then you were welcome to. In that, we had 3% of the respondents identified as Latinx, and 4.5% identified as some minority of one form or another. 3% identified as parents of SPED, and 94% did not respond to this or listed white and in their response. The reason we wanted to see some of this was we then were able to go in and see the surveys that identified as a minority, and then go down to see if their responses were similar to what the responses of everybody else was. And so we went through and analyzed all of that and found a lot of consistencies. Really didn't find anything outlying there that said, wait a minute, our Latino families are saying this very strongly. It was, of all your minority groups, it was basically the same message all the way through. So what was that message? Next slide. So we gave them 9 different criteria to choose from. And if I remember right, I don't have it, I think we let them choose 3, I think. And so which ones did they choose? And then we have an other category as well. 72% of the people that responded said balanced class size was one of the key criteria that they wanted us to pay attention to as we move forward. And what you'll see is there are a lot of things around balance here, but class size, almost twice as much as anything else, came to the forefront. That's not terribly unusual because class size is one of your biggest discussion points in anything you're doing right now. How do we maintain a reasonable class size for our kids and our staff? The other things that rose to the top were keeping neighborhoods together. 39% respondents said that. Balancing diversity, safety of travel, and distance student live from school were almost exactly the same. All three of those were within one vote of each other. And so all of those were very similar. Balance the students who have access to special ed services, 30%. And then the last few, providing individual school choice, balancing socioeconomic status as one of the criteria. I was a little bit surprised to see that down with 22% responding. And then an interesting one around creating individual exemptions. And we'll talk more about that on the next question. So those were the criteria that we gave them and how they kind of prioritized them as respondents and as a group. Let's go to the next slide and then we'll have some questions. The next question that we posed were, what are your biggest concerns? What are your biggest worries going into this change in school structure? And the number one concern that people have is that in the end, there'll be a perception that there's a good school and a bad school, that one school is better to go to than the other. It's the haves and the have-nots. There's a lot of ways to phrase that, but people expressed a lot of concern around making two schools that were very equal and provide the same services, same opportunities for kids. And so that was the number one concern that people had. The second concern were splitting up friends, families, and neighborhoods. Most of these comments were, oddly enough, about friends. I'm worried about my kids who have friends and they live in different parts of towns and now they won't be in class together anymore. And that was a concern. Families came up a few times, several times, I guess. And that was around, they have cousins who live across town and I'm afraid that they're not going to be in the same school anymore. And that's going to be a problem. And then neighborhoods, which we've talked about and we'll talk about more. So those were the top two. Then there was a group around balancing equity and diversity, balancing resources, programs, and opportunities in both schools, balancing socioeconomic status, and balancing class size. Those were all kind of clumped together around those. How do we create a boundary that balances all of those things? And that'll be extremely difficult to balance all of those and have it come out just perfect. In the end, we as a committee are going to have to decide which ones of those are going to be most important. If we can only meet one or two of those perfectly, which one or two of those are we going to make sure we do? And then other things that were there, travel distance and safety, I combined those as I did the analysis. 26 people had those concerns. And then impact on the current K-8 schools. Remember, about 40% of our respondents have kids in K-8 schools. And so people are concerned about what this boundary change is going to do to those schools as well. Now, when we talked last time, we talked about, are we just talking the boundaries of the two schools that the Robert Frost and so forth, or are we going to talk about boundaries elsewhere? And word from your leadership, district leadership, was our hope is to keep it within the boundaries of these two schools. If something happens that we have to creep either out or in some way to make it all work, that could be a consideration. That's not the intent or not the hope down the road. And so I think it's important to pay attention to those K-8 schools and what the impact could be. There was a concern around dividing the community. When you start dividing a section or your town, what's that going to be like, and is the community going to be upset with that? And then the last two I identified were we had 18 people who said they want to make sure that there isn't school choice that then supersedes where this committee suggests you lay boundaries and all of a sudden skews one school or another based on school choice. And then we had 14 others who said, I'm afraid I'm going to lose the opportunity to have school choice. And so those are in direct conflict with each other. And one of the things that in the end, we'll have to make a recommendation, or I would expect we'd make a recommendation to administration to say, you know, we think this is what you should do or how you should handle it. And believe me, that'll be controversial. Okay, that's a ton of information. Again, we're going to go back and revisit some of that. Rob, you want to cover the last two before we move on?
Sure, thanks, Randy. So on the next slide, yeah, it was about, you know, how do we, the question was, what would we do to create trust in the recommendation? This is a pretty open-ended question. And because input and communication were number 1 and 2, I'm going to take just a second and say, I want you to understand what that means as far as going through this information. So what I did was I took, just process-wise, is I took whatever it was that a person wrote, and I began to build a set of lists of different kind of input that I was getting on the survey, and then categorizing those. And so I pasted actual words into a document, and I think it's so important for us to share everything that we have and put it on the district's website. And so as part of communication, being really clear about, no, this is exactly what a person said on their survey, and this is how these were categorized over time so that we could arrive at this data, I think will help people not think that I'm somehow, you know, manipulating the data somehow. You could look at it yourself, and I think you'd come up with the same thing that I came up with, or what Randy just reported. So there were 61 different comments that were listed that said, it's really important to take input from us. And so when they said us, there was a variety of who they meant by us. Sometimes it was, you should take input from parents, and they might even say, I think you should only take input from parents. Or they might say, I think you should only take input from teachers. Or they might say, I think you should only take input from people who live in the city limits or outside the city limits and so forth. But it was, you should take input from us as we make this decision, including, we think that you should do some more surveying as you move along. And so that's something that we'll probably want to talk about at some point in time. Next was communication, and there were 54 comments about communication, and it was, you need to communicate regularly, it needs to be really clear, and it needs to be absolutely honest as you do that communication. And it wasn't just, it was also, you need to communicate before the meeting, and then you need to communicate after the meeting. We need to know what's going to happen or what's likely to happen, and we need to know what did happen. And so lots about, you know, how to communicate this clearly. A lot of things about, we want to know when the meetings are. We need you to communicate that to us, not just that there's a tape of the meeting on the website, but we want to know when the meeting is going to be held so that we can watch. So again, I think it's important to put all this on district website. Number 3 only had 10, but it kind of went along with communication. And so I stuck those next to each other just because it was nuanced. And, you know, this is just a call on my part, but it basically, these 10 said, you need to communicate about how you're making your decision. Like, when you make the decision, you need to communicate clearly about what the process was and why you made that decision. Not just tell us, but tell us why, which is a really nuanced part of communication. Number 4 was transparency. The process just needs to absolutely be open and transparent. If anybody thinks you're hiding something or pulling the wool over your eyes, it's just not going to work for us. You need to lay it all out there. That's why I think putting all this kind of thing out on the website is super important. Number 5 had just 11 responses, but it was very specifically about demographics. And it was, you need to consider demographics and who's telling you what as you make these decisions. So like Randy said, we went back and said, well, did this person tell us about their demographics? And are their responses any different than any other demographic? You need to think about that and consider that as you're going through the process. Same thing with socioeconomics. You need to consider socioeconomics and demographics also within how you divide this up. and then also how you're getting your responses. Number 7, 9 people said, do what's right for kids. We don't care about anybody else, just do what's right for kids. Make sure that these decisions are that. Number 8, there were 9 people who said, I don't think you should do this now. I think you should just leave it like it is. There were a number of reasons, but especially the COVID situation was one of those. People have been through enough. We don't need another change, or we don't need something different or stressful right now. Number 9 was provide choice, allow for transfers. So 7 people said that. There were 6 people who said, I trust what the committee's doing. I'm glad you're doing this work. Go for it. And then there were 6 people who said, use evidence-based best practices and communicate about the rationale around the evidence as you go forward. So I want you to remember this slide, because in item number 5, when we get into agenda item number 5, we're going to come back to this. And I'm going to be asking you what things you think are most important in this as we move forward. So I want you to look at this, and I'll give you a list of the top 5 or 6 of these, but you're going to want to be thinking about, as a committee, if we're going to say, how are we going to conduct this process? Which of these things are going to be things that you think should be part of that list? And I want a list of at least 5 things that people think are important. So that'll be an agenda item number 5. Okay, next slide. And then this is also the last slide, and the last question was question number 6. And the question was open-ended also, and it said, what else should the committee consider? So I went through the same process to create this list. There were 24 who said, whatever you do, if you're going to create 2 schools, the 2 schools have to have balanced programming. If you offer music in one school, you got to offer music in the other one. If you offer PE this way, you need to offer PE that way. If you're going to do special education here with this kind of program, you need to have special education there with that kind of program. The second one was, and this surprised me a little bit, hey, I think this is a great idea. I'm glad we're going to K-5, and it's about time that we got this done. Thanks for taking it on. Good luck. There were 16 of those, which I don't see that very often when we get this kind of thing about this open-ended back. So I thought that was interesting. Number 3 was take input from everybody, like everybody. Don't just pay attention to the people who we believe in the past have had more power in decision-making, or who somehow have held special sway in this community. That's not going to float for us. You need to listen to everybody and consider everybody. Number 4 was retain school choice. There were 15 people who said that. A lot of those were people who had children who attend K-8s currently. Number 5 was consider demographics. And when people talked about this, they were talking about equity and race. So they were talking basically about racial demographics. And then in number 6, don't impact K-8. This was a place where folks were saying, don't impact the K-8 schools. There were 11 of those. Number 7 was think long-term. So if you're going to do this, you need to not be thinking about just next year. You need to be thinking about the next 10 years, basically. Number 8 was don't do it now, please. Although there was one person in that group, so there were only 8 that said that. And then the 9th one said, I actually think this is a really good time. We've kind of had a halt to a typical school, and it's a break, and kids kind of aren't at school right now. And it's a really good time. If you're going to do this, do it now. It was an outlier, but I thought it was interesting. Number 9 was consider students first, kind of the same response I had previously. There were 8 people who said that. 8 people said class size is really important. You need to balance it and consider it. There were 7 who said socioeconomics are very important in this division. And there were 5 people who talked about facility improvements that were needed. Like the cafeteria at that school isn't good enough. If you're going to do this, you've got to upgrade that cafeteria. Or why don't you just build a school that would allow for K-8 within the community, within the central part of the city, or whatever. They had some kind of a facility wish. All right.
So that gives you an overview of what we heard from the community. One of the things I forgot that I had listed on here of worries that people had, things they're concerned about. 29 people said, I have no worries about any of this. And so that's good and confidence. Also, there are 21 that at that point said, I don't think now is the right time. And so those were 2 other areas as we talk about what are the worries of people out there in the community. there's a lot of information there, and we're going to come back, as Rob said, kind of looking at a slide at a time on a couple of these as we move into what your criteria are going to be and what the process is going to be. But until we get to that, or before we get to that, any general comments that anybody'd like to have? Do you feel like we got the information out, got good response from the community enough that you feel good about the information that you've received by way of survey? Okay, let me ask this differently then, if nobody wants to speak up. Give me a thumbs up if you think that's a good response and a good representation of the community. If you think it's just so-so, or you think we really need to dig deeper now. So thumbs up if you think it's good
I
response.
do have a question, sorry. I do
Okay.
have a question. I think one of the, I don't remember, I think it was 3% minority. I can't remember.
Yeah, 3% that identified. Yes.
What is the actual district? Yeah, that identified. What is the actual percentage of our district that would be considered minority?
What is your minority percentage, Scott or Steve?
I believe it's 25%.
Yeah.
So then you mentioned possibly doing a future survey. Just a couple things. Is there a way that we can reach those populations so we can have a more accurate representation? However, it's self-identifying, so maybe some of those people did not, so it could have been more.
Right.
Yep. And
yeah,
then, yep. Sorry, go ahead.
There obviously you can target much
The
better.
other question. Great. And then the other question, I noticed that, oh, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I know that multiple people shared it in different ways, and you could answer the survey multiple times if you wanted to waste your time doing that. Hopefully nobody did that, but is there a way that we could do a more secure survey? Maybe like have a code for families that we know that people didn't answer it multiple times?
Right, and I don't know how this one was set up to where if you had 2 email addresses, if you could go in, or you could take it multiple times. What
Andy,
we
I
find
can
in
address that if you'd like.
Okay, Derek.
Yeah, so yeah, Liz, that's a really great question. So when you're talking about dealing with a community survey, the issue is always accessibility versus security. And so sort of your choices are, you can send out something for anyone who you have their email address, right? And then once per email address, essentially that person's logging in and they can take the survey. But the problem is then how do you reach all of these people who you don't have their email address? How do you reach? And unfortunately, when we're talking about folks who might not have access to email, or who might not, want to respond in that way, we're often talking about folks who are, our minority populations, our populations in terms of like Spanish speaking and migrant and so forth. The other thing is that, as a school district, really the folks who we can contact in terms of having their email addresses pretty much begins and ends with parents and staff members. And so there are ways that we can sort of track and make sure that nobody is just, taking it a whole bunch of times themselves. The reality is that everybody can take it essentially the number of times that they have devices. So we did have it limited to a per device setting. There are ways around that. There sort of is no perfectly secure way that is also accessible. So we had to sort of make a choice when we sent that out. Would this be a very accessible survey, which was sort of the way we leaned, or would this be an extremely secure survey? Given the fact that what we really wanted was just as many voices to be heard as possible, we leaned toward that accessibility. And we did also send out, just so everyone knows, a Spanish language version of the survey. Right. And we also asked some of our advocate staff members to directly contact families who are Spanish speaking in the home to do the survey that way if they wanted to do that, if they maybe didn't have access otherwise. So.
And we also had translation done of the responses from our Spanish speaking.
Yeah.
parents.
I also think, Liz,
So-
I think your question is a great question around, you know, what's the demographic matchup look like? And that's, I think, important. And Randy and I can have a conversation with Scott and others after our meeting tonight and have that conversation about how can we do some better outreach there, because I think it's going to be important as we move forward. And then is there a survey we need to think about that would be or could look different, where we might be able to get a different kind of response as we go forward? So appreciate the comment, and it's absolutely valid. So we'll have to think about that.
Dave.
Yeah, I was just going to bring up a comment. You were, I think, I don't know if you already did it or you were going to give the thumb. I was kind of on the sideways thumb, just because I understand, kind of like Liz, I know that in our family, that survey was sent to 2 parents in the household. Both parents in our household responded to that survey and provided our own feedback to the district. So that's
Correct.
something to recognize. And that gets me to the question that you asked is, do we have enough, or do we have the right information? And I worry that we don't have enough people taking the survey. On the flip side, I don't think if more people took the survey, we would get drastically different results. So my thoughts are, I think we have enough information to move forward and come back to the community with some tangible goals and actions that we can take. And I don't think if we were to develop another survey and go back out, we would get any real drastic differences in feedback from what you already presented in the slides.
Okay. I will tell you that as far as the number of survey responses in a community your size, this was really good. It was good numbers. Now, whether it was multiple people, we don't see that a lot because people they're not voting. And so it's not like they think that, you know, they're going to gain advantage by putting this in 2 or 3 times. So we don't see that very often. It would have been nice if we had specific demographic information on each person who took it, because I think we'd see a much higher percentage then of our Latino parents taking that. But I'll tell you that there were multiple comments in the process around the question that we asked as benignly as possible. If you'd like to tell us some demographics on here, you're welcome to. And yet we had several people who said they took offense to that. Said it doesn't matter what my demographics are when you're asking me these questions. Well, so that's your balance, and you try not to really tick off your community when you send out a survey, and so you kind of ride that line and do the best you can. So
I think the really important question is, do we get a good enough response to impact your decision making? So you have an opinion, and now you've heard an opinion broadly from the community. And how does that influence you and your decision making? And do you have enough information back to say, yeah, there's enough other people who feel this way. If I'm going to represent them, here are the kind of responses that I think I would make based on the questions that are about to be put to you on how we're going to conduct this process.
And I think a lot of the value in this, so often we as parents, we have our own groups of people that we talk to, especially in these days, that you're kind of restricted to your group of friends. And you may have a group of friends that all believe or feel this way, and yet now you see a survey that's much broader, and it says, oh, wait, these are things we have to worry about and be concerned about as we make this decision. So this is really used to educate you. And then you become the delegates moving forward of, how are we going to implement what we now know from them and what we feel inside as to what the most important things are going forward. So with all that being said, I think I'm going to pull back the thumbs right now. What I want you to know is that we have the option at a later time, if you feel like we need different input, more input, something more targeted from the community, we have the option to go back out again and ask them different questions, ask specific groups different questions, and that would be something this committee just needs to say, hey, I think we need to know this from them in order to take that next step. Okay. All right, we blew right past our 6:45 time. Rob, I'm going to hand it over to you for public comment.
Thanks, Randy. So this is another opportunity for people to give their input and for you to hear it and to influence you as you are going about making your decision as a committee. I want to tell people again, there are two ways to give public comment. One is to use the chat feature to request to speak on Zoom. And the other one is to email requests to feedback@silverfalls.k12.or.us. And with that, I'm going to read the announcement that the Silver Falls School Board reads into each board meeting when they do public comment, so that we're consistent with that as we conduct these meetings. Even though they're technically don't have to be public, we've chosen to ask for input and be as inclusive and as transparent as possible. And this allows us to do that. And it goes like this. The board encourages citizens to share their ideas, opinions, raise questions, concerns, or complaints. Remember that we all model the way for our students, and we ask that you share your thoughts in a respectful way. Anyone providing public testimony is required to state their name and address. All public testimony is limited to 3 minutes for each individual, or up to 5 minutes may be granted for groups of 3 or more with similar testimony. Please identify your group and designate one spokesperson. Due to time constraints, the maximum amount of public testimony is 10 individuals. When called, please state your name, relationship to the district, place of residence, and the subject which you will address. The board will not hear personal complaints concerning district personnel or against any person connected with the school system. And public input from an individual should be new information only. Those repeating previous testimony will not be allowed to continue. And with that, we'll open this to public comment. We have 20 minutes set aside, but if we got 10 folks and they were 3 minutes each, we could get out to 30. So are there anybody who is ready to give public testimony?
We have not received anything in chat yet, and I am monitoring the feedback email. So I figure we'll give folks a minute here if they want to sign up.
It's my clock says 7:04. Why don't we wait till about 7:06? Anybody who needs to take a quick break, this would be a time to do it. Like if you just need a drink or something like that, not get up and leave. And it'll give us a couple of minutes for people to give public testimony if they'd like. With the number of survey responses that we got and the parent interest based on what people wrote in the surveys, I thought sure we would have public testimony tonight. So I'm surprised we don't. There were some strong comments sometimes that people definitely had opinion, which was wonderful, right? It's really great to read. I also think, you know, as a person who was a superintendent, I was superintendent in Tigard, Tualatin, and Sherwood at different times. I loved it when we had a survey like this from the community and got to read all the comments that people sent in, because there was so much learning that was in those comments about that we could look at and think about and figure out how to respond in a way that could perhaps support people differently or understand people differently than we had previously. And so I love the opportunity to get this feedback from your community, and for the administration and others who live in the community to have an opportunity to read through any of it. It's really valuable.
And you heard our report of it. And again, that was kind of a scaled down 15-minute version. We're also going to get to you and to anybody on the district website the opportunity to kind of see the raw data. It takes a while when you have as many open-ended questions as we have to kind of dig through it, but there's a lot of comments in there that I think you'll be interested to see, and we'll be able to get you a link to that so you can see an expanded version of what the responses were, down to ones that had just 2 or 3 different people who made mention of them. And it's worth your time to go through it. It gives you good perspective.
And just so you know, everybody, that that site is live on the district website as of this afternoon. We don't have a ton of content on there yet because we'll always make sure that the work group sees data or receives a presentation in this format before we post anything online. So as we receive data back, we'll put that online beginning tomorrow.
All right. So we've riffed for more than 2 minutes now, giving people a chance to request a chat or hit the feedback email. Have we gotten any?
No emails, no chat. I think everybody wants to just move the process along.
Let's do it.
Okay. As soon as you start drawing lines in the sand, it'll probably change.
Oh,
and that's okay. One of the other things I was going to add, Derek, to that site is we will also put your names on there, because that was one of the things that people wanted to know is who's on this committee, so that they can come talk to you. That's a much more comfortable way to kind of get their point across than to jump on a chat here or something like that. So that's all part of this process, and being able to identify that the district put together a really nice, well-rounded committee that has varying interests and the ability to come together and make the best decisions possible.
All right. I think that moves us to agenda item number 5.
Okay.
So in this agenda item, I'm going to refer back to slide number 6 in our PowerPoint. And so we may want to kick that slide up, slide 6 in the PowerPoint. And it was from question number 5, I think, on the survey.
Yep, give me just 1 second.
Yeah, I'll talk here and you can do that. And so here's the question. This is one of 2 decisions we're going to ask you to begin to make tonight. Actually, we'd like to have you make this one tonight, and then we'll make the second one. We'll give you information and then make the second one at our next meeting. And because we think this one's a little bit easier. And it is to think about or make a list of how the process should be conducted. So this is different than how you make the decision right there. So that'll be the next set of questions that we begin to work on. There are 2 pieces. One is, how should the process be conducted? And the other one is, what data or what information are we going to use to make this decision? This one we're going to make a decision on tonight. How should the process be conducted? And so when we said, how do we create trust in this recommendation, we were really asking, how should we go about doing this work? And again, the top 6 responses were input. We need to take input from everyone. Communication. We need really robust communication that's clear. So I'm going to include clear within that. Those are 2 basically. That it needs to be transparent. You need to consider demographics of who's responding. You need to consider socioeconomics of response. And if we could go down further to student-centered. And so I don't know, it's not my responsibility to determine what the list should be, but were I to make a recommendation or just use what the community has said, and we were going to use 5 or 6 different things that we said, as we conduct this process, we need to make absolute certain that these things happen. I would say that it's numbers 1 through 6. We need to be really good at taking input, communicating, being clear with that communication, being transparent, considering demographics and socioeconomics. Now, there are others, but there were 9 that said student-centered and there were 61 that said input. Or we could just use this list. So at this point in time, really the decision of how we want to go about this is up to you. But I do think creating trust in this recommendation is very important, and it goes to how we're going to go about conducting it. My recommendation to the committee, in order to move things along and as a starting point for discussion, would be, let's use numbers 1 through 6 on this list. And with that, I'll open it up to discussion, and we'll try to get to a decision here fairly soon using consensus as a model. Dave.
I don't want to go against the grain, but I also recommend moving number 11 up. I know this is not the first time a school district has gone through a process like this. And I think going off of best practice and what has been done, lessons learned from other districts making this this type of change is worthy of adding up to one of the critical functions of the top, maybe not the top, but up in the top 6, I would suggest.
Great, thanks, Dave. I appreciate that. Interesting comment. I can't see everybody else on my screen right now because we've got the slide up, which is fine. Is there anybody else who wants to speak? Please do.
Yeah, I would. I think that number 7 should move up and be included. I think that's really important to make sure that what we're doing is not about the parents and the community that, you know, who feels what, but it's what's best for the kids.
Great, thank you. Other ones?
I kind of feel like maybe number 3 and 4 could be combined. So, I mean, it kind of seems like those are pretty much the same thing. So maybe if we could combine those, then we could move, because I 100% agree that sometimes what's best for kids isn't what's best for grownups. And I think that's that we do need to keep what is best for kids, you know, at the forefront of this.
Right. So Aaron, interestingly, when I did this and I looked at what people wrote and I tried to figure out how to categorize these things, the 2 that I thought were most similar were 2 and 3, because what people were really saying, and maybe I shouldn't have broken it out this way, right? But there was a nuance to it, that it wasn't just that people said communicate clearly and honestly or regularly, but what they said was, when you do something, explain it.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah, so I could, you know what, I could totally make that argument also, that 2 and 3 could be really.
And so I think 2 and 3, you know, communication that's clear and full and clear, or something like that, is the as the phraseology. I mean, we can mess with the wordsmithing part. I don't want to wordsmith now, but I kind of like the idea of 2 and 3 being together, perhaps. And I maybe should have just added them together here, but I did think there was an important nuance for the community to understand as I was doing that. But thank you. Anybody else?
Rob, are we going to dive into these a little bit deeper at a later time? Are we just looking to get a consensus of the top ones?
So what I'm hoping for here is that we would identify a set of things that anytime we do something in the committee, that we reflect back on these and ask ourselves the question, have we met this standard? And it's not that if you don't have provide choice. So to be honest with you, I don't think that provide choice necessarily is about the recommendation, about how you're going to create boundaries, right? I think it is a recommendation the committee may decide to, and probably should, weigh in on. Should there or shouldn't there be choice? And if there is, what would that look like? You know, how would you go about that? Is it a phase in or a phase out, or is it just open or not? I think that's a great recommendation for the committee to make, but I don't think it's about making sure that the work that you're doing is work that can be trusted, right? So I don't know that I would include that one, or, you know, maybe don't do it now. That seems like, you know, undo the decision that was made. A point on that, for example. But I do think what we want to be able to do is say, we're about to make a decision. Have we got input on that decision? Or we've done something. Are we clearly communicating this? Have we done enough to communicate that this is happening to the community? Those kinds of things. That we would ask ourselves those questions as we go about the process. Does that answer your question, Dave?
That clears it up for me. Thank you.
Sure. Any other ones from people? So I'm going to take a stab at it, just to move this along based on what I've heard. I didn't hear any disagreement about moving up number 7, which is student-centered. If it was okay with Melissa, or maybe it wasn't Melissa, it was Aaron. Aaron, I'm probably running roughshod over what you said a little bit, but I would recommend that we combine either 2 and 3 or 3 and 4, based whatever you prefer is great. Again, I kind of like 2 and 3, but 3 and 4 is fine too. And then number 11, I think, was the other one that we talked about moving up. And so I'm going to take a stab at this and say that The committee would go about the process in a way to build trust that would include numbers 1, 2, and 3 combined. 4 is transparency, 5 is demographics, 6 socioeconomics, 7 student-centered, and 11, make sure that we're using evidence and that we're in our clear communication that we're talking about the evidence that we're using. That would be the list that we would use. And I would be looking for consensus to that as an offer up. And could I see the full slides? We'd need to take down the PowerPoint so that I can see what people are doing with their thumbs here. Just one second, I'll ask the question again. And if anybody needs clarity on what I said, please make sure to do that. So we should be able to take the PowerPoint down here. Okay, I can see everybody. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to just leave the statement that I made. How many people give me thumbs up, sideways, or down on that? I think I have all thumbs up. I rarely make a suggestion that gets that much thumbs up the first time. So I'm pleased with that. Excellent. So we have one decision to make and one more to begin to crawl through as we move forward tonight. Thank you very, very much. I think that's a great list, by the way. And please do not let Randy and I move forward without considering that list as we go through the process. Please hold us to that. Thank you.
I also think it's important that we use your community knowledge. I know that we had a comment on the chat about, are we getting the information out so that people know they can create a common comment during this meeting? And that follows through with all of the transparency, openness, being clear on how we're reporting out. If there's different, better, more effective ways for us to do that so that people in the community understand and know what's going on, that's our goal. But of course, Rob and I don't know that. And yet we want to do everything possible in order to get that information out there so that when this is over and done, people may argue the decision, but they can't argue the process because the process was open, clear, and you had good minds, working on it, trying to decide what to do. Okay. So the next step in the process is criteria. And this one we've alluded to 2 or 3 times about what is going to be the driver, the most important thing when we look at dividing schools, creating 2 balanced schools. What's going to be the most important factor or criteria that we have to consider as we move forward? And so, Derek, if you could pull up the slides again, it'd be slide number 4, most important criteria for the committee to consider. Thank you. On this list, there are 9 items, though a lot of correlation between those and what we found on the next slide, which was the things people were most worried about. If you look at these, there's really 2 on this list that I don't think you need to consider as a committee right now. And that is providing individual school choice and creating individual exemptions. Same reason that Rob just talked about it in his part, because that's not really about where you set boundaries. Now that may be something you address again about process once you get boundaries set, but that's not really about the criteria that you will use in order to set those boundaries. So what that does is it leaves us with 7 different criteria to consider: class size, neighborhoods together, balance of diversity, safety of travel, distance from school, balance of students who access special ed services, and socioeconomic status balance. So those are the 7 that we have listed on there. I want you to think and then let us know as you're thinking, are there any that we're missing that should be criteria? And just so you know where this is going, in the end, after this meeting, I'm going to send you a spreadsheet, and each one of you are going to rank these from 1 to 7 or 8 or 9, however many we have. And you'll respond back to me with that spreadsheet of your rankings. And then we will tally those in a way when we get together the next time we will have a real good understanding of where you believe the criteria should end up, and then we'll come to a consensus that way. Okay, so the 7 we have listed there, I said, Derek, if we could get rid of the slides now and go to the full view. Thank you very much. So any others besides those 7 that we ran off and the ones that were prioritized by others that you believe we should add to that list to talk about in our most important criteria to consider?
I just have a quick question about the wording that was used on the survey. It's been a while since I filled it out, but did you use
Okay.
the words socioeconomic status as the words? And do you think that that could have been a confusion? Would income or something similar to that be less educational jargony so people would understand? And especially since that seemed to be a priority in another place but wasn't there.
Yes, and it was one of the concerns that was much higher, and I told you they were different, and I think that's very true. And that's always a weird one as to how you ask it, you know, because socioeconomic, if you're in schools, a lot of times you're used to dealing with that lingo, and yet a lot of people don't equate that to, you know, free and reduced, poverty levels, things like that. And so that could be a good reason why that was as low on here as it was, and really astute point there, Liz. Thank you. Any other things that you think should be a criteria
So
that
Randy,
we
I
need
know
to
that
consider?
one of the things that you and I discussed when we looked at this data after we did was that there was a fair interest in this idea that one school is better than another, right? There was a real, in fact, it was number 1 on the next slide. The number 1 concern that people had was that there'd be this sort of have school and have not school, or one school that's considered better and one that's considered worse or whatever. And, you know, that's just such a concern in every community. And I worked in 2 different districts in my career that had 2 high schools. I worked in Albany and then I worked in Tigard Tualatin. And man, always a concern about those 2 high schools. But the same is true with elementary schools within a community. People care about that. And, you know, one of the things that I found in my career was, and this is back to what Liz just asked about, is how often it seemed like that designation or that belief was based on socioeconomics within the community. That oftentimes a school with lower socioeconomics, lingo that we use as educators, was seen as the school that was a lower performer or was the have-not school, as compared to another school that had a little more wealth within a boundary area. And so that was number 1 on the other slide. And I just thought that was really interesting, and something that I thought a lot about was, how would people in Silverton designate a school that's better than another school? Is it about just purely about student outcome on assessment? Is it about, it seems like those teachers are better than other teachers, or is it about socioeconomics? Oftentimes, you know, this isn't true everywhere, but a lot of times race and socioeconomics can go together in a community. And so, you know, those considerations are really important. And I just want to make sure that we air those, and you think about those as you're going through this process of ranking these. And if I say something in a way that offends, please let me know. But if we don't bring these things up and talk about them, then we miss an opportunity. So I'm going to say things sometimes, and if I say it in a way that you'd like to have me say differently, I'm happy to take the feedback, but it won't stop me from raising it.
Dave.
Yeah, I guess I would add 2 more that I don't think I saw on the list. The first and foremost, I think, is a fairly easy one, and that is we haven't really specifically said that the goal is going to be to try to maintain room for every student within the boundaries. So we're going to try to make space for all the kids that are within wherever we decide that's going to be an overarching goal. I would throw that out. And
so explain that to me again. So are you talking about making sure that all the students that currently go to these 2 schools will have room within the 2 schools when we divide them? No.
Well, yeah, when the lines are set, there's going to be space for those students to attend in that boundary.
Okay.
So it's about school capacity.
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
Where we make the line, the school will be able to hold the number of students that we designate for that school.
Okay. Got it.
Good one.
And the other one?
And the other one is the criteria that we're looking at. I guess not a good way to describe it, but I guess I would say the criteria from today versus tomorrow. So we're looking at a lot of data that is looking at the current students in neighborhoods, the current demographics, the current socio-status of kids currently in neighborhoods. And there are some things on the map that we need the map to decide the boundaries, but also just making sure that we're clear in our decisions that some of these are for today and they're not really applicable 4 to 5 years down the road possibly. So sometimes we'll need the map for some hard boundaries, but recognizing when we're not using those hard lines for certain things.
Right. We're going to have to make some educated guesses. And one of the things we're going to need to do is bring in somebody from the community leadership, government leadership, to be able to say, this is kind of what we're looking at growth. Where's it going? How's that going to impact in the next 5 years? Do you have developments planned? If so, what do you expect on an influx of students and so forth? So those are certainly a piece to the puzzle as we go forward. Derek, if you could pull up slide 5 there, that was the biggest concerns of the community. Just as we look at our criteria, I think it'll be important to revisit what people thought. And so as Rob pointed out, the perception of one school being better than the other, that's not really something we can add into a boundary, other than I think the way you solve that is by all the balance questions. Are you balanced socioeconomic? Are you balanced in programs and resources, opportunities, class sizes, and so forth? And so I'm not sure that that's one we can address there. When we look at number 2, splitting up friends, families, and neighborhoods, friends is, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you draw boundaries that don't possibly split up kids who have gone to school together now for a couple of years or a few years and have developed friendships, and yet they live in opposite places. Families, you could have extended families, the same issues. We did put neighborhood, so neighborhoods on the criteria there. And so those were kind of the big ones, and impact on current K-8 schools and so forth will come into play later, but probably isn't your criteria at this point. So any others, if we drop the slide and go back to a full view again, Derek, thank you. Any other criteria that you think should be added on to the list that I'm then going to ask you to prioritize? Okay, what you can expect from me is an email here by tomorrow, and it will have a spreadsheet on that we'll find a way to add these to. There'll be 9 items on there, and I'll want you to rank them 1 through 9, just not the top 2 or 3 that are most important, actually ranking them 1 through 9. And then I'll compile that with all of you so that we can kind of get an idea, and that'll make the discussion much easier since we have so many people involved. As we come together next time, it's January 7th, and we will then thumbs up on the priorities, and we'll also start drawing some lines on paper and starting to see how this is going to work out, keeping in mind then the criteria that's most important, and then the processes that Rob just talked to you about, making sure that we follow those, 6, 7, whatever we end up with there.
And Randy, could I
Yeah.
check? I want to just check with Dave, since I think what I heard you say is you're thinking about adding 2 to the list that you send to people.
Yes.
Okay, and so I just want to see if these work for what Dave suggested. Something like the schools have the capacity to serve the number of students within the boundary. That would be one. And the second one would be the recommended solution works now and into the near future. Does that sound is that right what you said? I just want to make sure on that one especially.
Yes, that would capture it.
I don't know if it maybe foreseeable future would be better, but foreseeable sometime is a long time. You know, next 5 years, I don't know what the right number
Yeah.
was.
Exactly. So the issue that I think I was trying to get ahead of is us placing a huge deal of importance, let's say for this year, on looking at the boundaries and basing it off of sibling number for this year may make sense, but knowing that that's not a long-term metric to be able to gauge what maybe 3 years down the road, should the boundaries have been different? Should we have used a different metric to base our decision off of than something that's so fluid as number of siblings?
Mhm.
Got you. Okay.
Okay. So again, you can expect to receive an email. I'd appreciate if in the next 3 or 4 days after that, you sat down, really thought about what you think the most important things are in how we make this decision moving forward. Then that'll be helpful, and we'll go from there.
I do think this is an incredibly important decision.
Yeah.
As we move forward, because it will tell us what we're gonna strive for as number one. We got to meet this criteria. Number two, we need to meet this criteria. And so it'll be really important. It will influence a lot of how those boundary lines actually get drawn. I'm sure.
And it's really easy to list those 7 things and say, yeah, we're going to balance all of these things. But you saw the map, and when we start drawing lines, I can assure you that not all of those things are going to balance when you draw a line. And so when they don't all balance, you're going to have to decide, all right, where do I put that line so that the most important ones balance? And then we go from there. And so it's critical. Okay. All right. Now it feels like we're talking at you forever, but that's kind of the nature of one of these online meetings. Our next step in this is to help gain a better understanding of transportation, some of the rules, how they apply. Districts, the state kind of has guidelines around student transportation, but districts also has some choice in that. And so we've asked the district to be able to kind of share what their expectations are, what the norm is around student transportation. So Scott, I'm not sure who was going to do that with you.
So hi, Randy and group. Yeah. So I asked Durham Transportation to provide some state guidelines in terms of their practices, and they're in a little bit of a transition right now in their leadership here. And Heather unfortunately could not be here tonight, but the only thing that they had recorded was the state requirement of a 1 mile radius or 1 mile walking distance for K-5 students, which is pretty standard everywhere, is that if you are, the district must provide transportation if a student K-5 lives beyond a mile from the school. Now, I also know that there's some additional requirements or expectations regarding that if you're within the 1 mile boundary, that you also have safe access to walk. So if you were in an area that you had a high, high trafficked area, or you lacked sidewalks, that the district would have some responsibility to provide transportation there. So at this point, the only information Durham has provided for us is a 1 mile, the state standard for 1 mile. I think the one thing that with the 5 maps work that we can look at is how does that map work with what Durham uses to build its routes off of, and also be looking at, because I do think you could also wouldn't really want students walking a mile to a bus stop to get on the bus then, but I do think that, you know, within legal requirements, we would be okay to do that. I don't think that's necessarily would be a very popular recommendation. But then also we could, but I do think the work with 5 maps and how Durham builds its routes are going to need to come together so that we can look as we potentially move boundaries, what are we doing to transportation routes? And where might bus stops either need to be moved to, or, you know, because I do think that that's going to be something for the district to consider financially, is to limit those bus routes where possible.
So normally in a system like this, you would believe that your bus routes would get a little less complicated because you don't have all of your kids in that big region going both places. Now you will probably have more kids in this area going to this school and so forth. But as a district, have you pretty much stayed with that mile, or have you reduced that size? What have you done in the past? And do you plan on changing?
So to my knowledge, that they've held to that 1 mile. And I don't anticipate us changing. I think as we make decisions here, you know, there may be we may have to examine how we prioritize our routes. I do think, like you said, though, from the start, this is going to make our transportation system much easier. Because we were not going to be going through the same neighborhoods 3 times during a day to transport students to school. So I think we're going to be able to, you know, I think Durham's going to need to be at the table looking at that with us so that they can be looking at how to build routes that are going to be much more seamless.
Okay.
So I'm giving you guys a little bit more of your time back because I don't have a whole lot more to report,
Okay.
but I would be able to, if members of the committee I'm sorry, work group, I always have to correct Scott, it's a work group. And if anybody from the work group has questions you want me to take to Durham, I can do that.
So I would love to know, Dan, if there are any safe access issues that you need to transport across. And I didn't know, you know, there's a couple highways there. I didn't know if those met that criteria or not. It's not that you couldn't, it's not that they have to influence the boundary, but it's something to be aware of.
Okay, I'll take that back to Durham and get that clarification.
Anybody else?
Any other questions of Dan about transportation?
I can't imagine letting a little child walk anywhere near a mile to get to school. I didn't even let my kids walk down our long driveway when they were little.
And that is where some of the struggles come. And I've had that discussion 100 times. And in Tillamook, you can have, I remember having the discussion about, no, the bus needs to come down there because the coyotes run across this field and my kid's not going to walk through there. And so yeah, I know that in every community you have those discussions about what's reasonable. So
I hear you, Julie. My kids live 0.9 miles from their elementary school. They had to walk the wrong direction to get to the bus stop to do that. So it definitely, but that's what districts sometimes have to do in order to, you know, do we fund busing or what do we fund? So those are definitely some of the issues that we have to be wrestled with.
Did I see another hand? Any other comments there on transportation? And as far as logistics of this group, you just have to be aware of transportation. You don't have to figure it out. That's Durham, that's the district to have to figure out how best. And there will be a push and pull until you get to a place to where people feel like it's fair and reasonable.
Okay.
Okay.
Excellent. Well, The next segment that we wanted to talk about just real briefly and see if there's anything, the question here really is there anything else that you need or any reports that you would need that would be helpful? So I'm going to give you a list of a few of the things that we have and then see if there are some other kinds of things that either you would need produced or that you're aware of that exists that would be helpful in making the decision. And it is about, what we currently have available. So we have the current district boundary maps of the schools in the district. That's one of the things that we have. And certainly I think one of the most valuable things about those maps is just where the roadways are and where neighborhoods are, how do the roads run and that kind of thing, because we're mostly talking about, or we're intending to talk about just the in town, the 2 schools, and not so much the other ones. And so there's only one boundary right now for the 2 schools, and we need to divide that boundary up. But still, I think it's a valuable thing to have those maps. The second one is the Portland State University Demographic Study. So PSU's done a demographic study. They do this regularly. It helps districts predict their budgets and growth over time and think about bonds and that kind of thing. And it's a school at PSU that does this work in the state of Oregon and other places where they try to figure out what growth will look like, where it will exist, so that good decisions can be made long-term. And we have the most recent, I think it was last year's study that PSU did for the district. And it's a really good piece of information for us to have. The third one is the 5 Maps program that we had a demonstration of today. And I think that will be something that we rely heavily on as we move forward. The fourth is the committee report on the decision to move to K-5 schools. There's a fair amount of information and data in that report that was delivered and that the board acted on or used to take action to move to a K-5 model. And so having that report, I think, is really valuable for people to look at, because some of the information in there could be influential in this decision-making as well. The next one is a report that the city had done by a company called Economics Northwest, or Eco Northwest. And it's a report on city growth and housing needs. It's a really interesting report. I dug through that thing. I think there's good information in it. I think it's a report that goes from 2020 to 2040. And really the question for the city was, what kind of housing do we need and where should we put it? So do we need single family? Do we need joint? Do we need trailer parks? Do we need multifamily dwellings? What do we need? And so in order to meet, and what kind of land do we have within our growth boundaries that would allow us to meet the demands and needs in a rational way out to 2040? And so having that, I think, is really helpful also, especially when we start talking about long-term growth. The only other thing I can think of that I didn't have on my list here is, of course, meeting with the city planning department so that we know what currently has been permitted or is in the process of consideration for permit when it comes to building. So that's what I'm going to write down on my list. Is there anything else that you can think of that you're aware of that we either should get or that currently exists that we'll need that could be helpful, a report or information that could be helpful in making this decision? Dave.
So excuse me not knowing a little bit more of the district processes, but for me, just to get ahead of some of the community concern around equity at the schools, I would like to know if there's any specific criteria based off of boundaries that go into funding each separate school. So funds come into the district and the district disperses funds to each of the schools, but is there anything specific to the boundaries that would require certain funds going to certain schools?
Great question. And some districts do that and some do not. I don't know for this, but I think that will be an important thing for the committee to know as we move forward. So we'll get that information for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other ones? Yes, Kyle.
Yeah, so we talked about capacity of our schools, but we didn't talk about usable classrooms, number of classrooms. I think that's very important to think of.
Excellent. We do have a school capacity report. I just forgot to list that one. That's a great one. We're going to need it. So we'll make sure you have that. Thank you. Other things.
And that's also really important. Usable rooms is hugely important because you're not just going to dump them all in the gym because the building can hold that many. And so that certainly dictates how many grade level classes you can offer in each building. Other things that
Try
you
not to
need.
laugh because I used to argue with my elementary principals about how many usable rooms they really had. I found they usually had more usable rooms if there was some kind of money attached to using them. But anyway, it's always an interesting thing. Kristen.
I am working with our SPED department, and I would be curious to know if there's been any talk yet about SPED programs and how they would be where they would be housed. Would it be the same programs in each school, or would there be a progression between the two schools?
Okay. And I know there's an answer to that question because I've had some discussion about it, but we'll bring it back to you as we move forward. But again,
Thank you.
I think it's a really important piece of information as you think about how to make these boundaries. Yeah, and obviously to some parents and educators will be incredibly important information. Other ones. I'm ashamed of myself for not thinking of a couple of these. Good job. Dave.
Just one last comment on traffic, and I don't know if it's in the Durham in their span of control or not, but just general that some of the DOT daily traffic information related to the roadways and how congestion they can get within the city. I don't know if we have time of day, if we can pull that. I mean, if we can capture and get access to some of that data based off of traffic congestion versus 8 a.m. versus 9:30 versus later on in the day, but that would be helpful if we could.
Okay. Good one. And there were probably half a dozen to a dozen comments in the survey that referred one way or another to traffic and that kind of thing. There just weren't enough. It sort of fell into another category because there just weren't enough for it to tally up in any individual category. But
that may be an ask of the city. The city may have some of that average daily traffic and information at the city level as well.
Good question. And
I will say inherently based on the change you're making, you will reduce or compartmentalize traffic much differently than it is right now. What we saw when we made that change the other direction was all of a sudden we had twice as much traffic because we had a whole bunch of families that were dropping kids off at this building and then over to this building. Your K-5s are going to be in one place and it's one drop now, which should help in some of that.
Good data to have. Okay. Anybody else? Erin.
I've got just two questions. Number one, when the 5 maps was going through, all the information and all the data they have on the students, are we basing that or using the data based on this current year or past years? Or I'm just wondering, with everything going on right now, our numbers are not where they really would be. So, for instance, at Mark Twain, our kindergartners, we're running just over half of what we usually do.
Right.
So so that's one question. I'm just wondering, are we taking that into consideration when looking at the numbers? And then my second question is about data with kids that are just on the fringes of the boundaries. I think I asked last time about Pioneer. Even though Pioneer currently does not, new families don't go to Mark Twain. What about all the kids that are already in Mark Twain or families? And, if the families have siblings, they're already going to our schools. So how do we have that information also? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I didn't get that one. I'm sure everybody else did, but not.
So we've got a very big development that just starting this year, any new families go to an outlying school now. But that's it's a development that's on the, the outskirts of town. So I know that we're trying to stick to not messing with that boundary, but within that development, we still have all the kids that are, grandfathered in or currently going to those, to our schools. So we've still got to decide where those kids are going to go. So I'm just wondering if Pioneer is not currently in our boundaries, but yet they still are, do we have all that data?
So just if I could clarify that. So, and Scott, Steve, certainly correct me if I misspeak, is that the Pioneer neighborhood is still in the Mark Twain boundary. Now, during some of the transition in leadership and to help alleviate some crowding initially at Mark Twain, we added a route to take for families that were volunteering to attend Silvercrest. They were allowed to go there. And I mean, maybe some of those conversations felt like voluntold, but technically they were volunteering to go to Silvercrest. And so there is nothing official, no board policy changing that boundary. If you live in Pioneer, your home school is, well, now it's if you were a K2 student, you would be entitled to go to Mark Twain.
So is that, because that sounds different than what we talked about last time. So Pioneer is still going to be designated Mark Twain or Robert Frost?
Well, that's,
I think that,
I mean, that's why we have, we have Silvercrest, Butte Creek, Scotts Mills here. Our goal again is to draw a boundary for two K-5 schools, Mark Twain and Robert Frost, understanding that if we have a capacity issue, those other areas may have to get looked at. But our goal is to, we don't want to redraw those boundaries if we don't have to.
Yeah, there was never any official change to the boundary. So as far as I understand it, Pioneer is a Mark Twain within the Mark Twain boundary, but because there was some capacity issue and there was room at Silvercrest, there had been some interest expressed about getting up to Silvercrest, but there really wasn't a bus route. So the previous principal had done a little bit of marketing and said, hey, we have room up there. So that was kind of how that came about, but there was never an official amendment to the existing boundary.
So I think, Aaron, you bring up a good point in that you may have boundaries right now where if they were strictly followed, couldn't fit all the kids possibly, is what you're alluding to. And so that's one of those things that, again, the leadership has said they'd like to keep those boundaries the same unless it doesn't work. And one of the things that wouldn't work then is if you couldn't fit all the kids in the buildings that you have the way they are. And so that's got to be part of the discussion and part of drawing those lines with 5 maps. And you'll start with those outside boundaries being where they are now. And maybe at some point those have to adjust a little bit. Hopefully not. Any other thoughts or comments?
Dave had his hand raised there for a second.
Oh, I was just going to add on to that the previous conversation, just by saying, which is why would you say our previous discussion on identifying those guiding principles are so important?
Yeah, very true.
I saw Julie too, wave her hand.
I like the clarification that Pioneer is still going to be within the Mark Twain, Robert Frost boundaries. I think there's just been a lot of chatter around town without any basis. So I like the idea of keeping that same boundary with the option that if parents want to send their kids to those 3 outlying schools, it's an option for them. Is that what you're saying?
I think that's what they say it currently is, and I think that's one of the things that we're going to have to address as far as a recommendation going forward. That whole question, we've alluded to it, I think 3 or 4 different times now, is that school choice question. And do we allow or don't we allow? And there's advantages on both sides of that. If you allow school choice, you may draw the perfect line that has the absolute perfect balance, and yet you could have a group jump across, and all of a sudden that doesn't have a balance anymore. And yet, when you offer school choice, a lot of people choose to access that, and that makes them happy and makes life easier in a lot of ways as well. So that'll be something that has to be flushed out, and that'll be a really interesting discussion. Anything else, Rob, on this?
I just think along with the boundary recommendation, there's an opportunity for you to hang some other recommendations on that recommendation. And they could be things like school choice, or they could be a phase-in plan, like we're going to do this, but here's an opportunity. There is some transfer opportunity for current 3rd graders, for example, or current 4th graders, for example. So there'll be a boundary recommendation and then another set of recommendations that can go along with that. And again, the recommendations that can be considered, accepted, or rejected, any of this, but I think that folks would like to accept the recommendations that get made. So we'll have to be really thoughtful about what we hang on to tack onto this as other recommendations. But there are at least 2 that I think we've had some discussion about, right? And maybe now 3 with Pioneer. So that gives us a couple things to think about as we move forward so that we can make it make sense for everybody. Okay. Good discussion.
All right.
Good list of stuff too. We'll get that stuff together and get it out to people.
Well, and we add on to that list, as we said before, the survey response, the raw data from the surveys, our extended analysis of the surveys and so forth. There'll be a lot of information for you to be able to dig into and try to get your head wrapped around. One of the things I'd like to do before we wrap up here tonight is I'd like to get an idea from you. If you were just walking into a meeting and said, okay, they're going to take these boundaries and they're going to divide it in half, is there an obvious one? So when we go to 5 maps, you've got to start somewhere. Where would an obvious, this is how you would divide this big group, these 2 schools boundaries right now, in half? If there was an obvious one, where would it be?
And
Kyle?
this is an important question.
Yeah,
because between this meeting and the next meeting, Brandy and I are going to start messing with that, right? We're going to start just messing with a map and 5 maps and trying to figure out what might make sense here. So we need some ideas from you about where to start. So what do you think?
Right, and by geography, something make perfect sense. What is it?
Yeah. Water Street would be a big one.
As a dividing street?
Yeah, there's South Water and there's North Water, but those would be some big streets. And Main Street is another big one, but South and North Water would be probably the biggest.
Okay. Steve, I hope you're writing these down, so because you're the one that'll.
I'm scribbling them, but
yeah. Other
the
thoughts?
2 highways, 213 and 214, because they cross, they kind of make a grid of 4 corners.
They do.
So, Kyle, that water is one of them.
So also something interesting to think about when you start doing highways like that as dividing lines. Do you continue that dividing line all the way out the highway? Because then you have kids that live in the country across the road from each other to go into different schools? Or do you get out of town and say, now everything out this highway is this school and everything out that highway from here is that school? Just something interesting.
In schools that already kind of is quadranted off, but the in-town sections, it's kind of seems to make sense. Sorry, my dog. Someone's outside.
Okay, good. Other thoughts?
I would include in this question, are there neighborhoods that are obvious that might need to stay together if we were going to make that one of the criteria? And I'm jumping way ahead on that, but I just am curious. And I think these comments, if there are some people out there who are listening, people are going to start to sit up straight and listen really hard, right? We may have public comment next time, but that's what we need.
So are you saying, are there neighborhoods that like are clear they need to stay together, or they need to stay together and this is the school they're closest to? Which are you asking?
I'm asking, are there neighborhoods that need to stay together? But I'm open to whatever information you want to give me, Aaron.
I mean, so I'm just thinking, we live up, up Steelhammer, and there's a couple neighborhoods that make sense to me that those would stay together. At the top of that is Abaquah Heights. I would assume that neighborhood would need to stay together. I would assume Pioneer needs to stay together. Where else? What's the one up? There's the big neighborhood. I can only think of what it's called by Silverton people, not like the actual name. Edgewood Drive up, that's a neighborhood I would assume needs to stay together.
The Silverton Heights area up above Eureka, off of Eureka.
Yeah, that's the one I was talking about.
Kyle and Brett.
I would assume it makes sense for Milltown to stay together.
So who made that comment? Was that Joni?
It was Joni.
Yes.
Okay. Joni, I saw in the surveys 2 or 3 times Milltown was referenced.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me what Milltown? I don't know anything about Milltown. What would I find if I went there?
It is a lower socioeconomic neighborhood. It's pretty close to Mark Twain. It's like really close to us. But yeah.
Is a lot of diversity there or not?
I think there is some diversity there. I think if you are coming from out of town and you don't know it, you're going to find really cheap housing there.
Okay.
So if you're looking to get into Silverton and you don't know, but I think for the most,
cheaper housing. Okay, excellent.
Is there a lot of multifamily housing there, apartments there, or anything?
No, it's pretty much single family homes. There might be some duplexes. I think there's some duplexes, but there's not apartments there.
Okay. That helps wrap my mind around what it looks like. So thank you. Dave.
Yeah, I just want to go back and try to understand Rob's question on the community aspect, because refresh my memory from the survey. I know that on the concerns that rated pretty high. I think it was number 2 on the list. Not sure how many, what percent of community members, but just the concept of keeping neighborhoods and communities together as a whole ranked pretty high. So I'm
right, and that was one that I tallied, and on that it had splitting up friends, families, and neighborhood. Friends came up most in that list. There were 41 people that listed those. Splitting up friends, and that's that's a hard one for us to address. Neighborhood certainly was a piece to that, and I'd probably guess off the top of my head there are probably 10 to 12 people who talked about neighborhood specifically.
Okay, because if I was to try to dissect that a little bit, I would say part of that concern may be parents that may be going to work out of town early. Kids are getting together. I know we probably can't decide that into the boundaries, but if I would dissect the friends aspect, I think that's partly where maybe that might be coming from. But the community aspect sticking together, I see is a goal to try to achieve.
Nice.
Yeah.
So 2 other neighborhoods, one would be Webb Lake. And then the other one is kind of, I actually don't know what it's called. If someone else does, let me know. It's kind of like on the backside of Webb Lake. I don't think it's technically considered Webb Lake, but it's on the highway. Like got a bunch of
Herbs.
Herb garden.
Herb garden.
What is it?
Herb garden.
Oh, is that the name of it? And that's what I was gonna say though, it's plant streets, like sage. And, anyway,
There's also Silver, what is it, the mobile home park.
I was going to ask about mobile home.
Silver Cliff is on, so there's the herb garden and then there's the Silver Cliffs. And that's kind of it's almost gated, like a gated mobile home park.
So I saw in the city Echo Northwest report that there were some trailer parks, but it looked to me like, at least it looked to me like they were senior living trailer parks. Is that not the case? There's one that's not?
There's one that is, the others are not.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So
I appreciate. Go ahead.
There's a whole new neighborhood that's being planned back behind the fire department. I know they had broken ground for that at one point, but I think they, I don't know that they have moved on with it. And that's going to be single housing, duplexes, apartments, kind of a mix of different. And that's going to go from the fire department all the way up back behind Robert Frost, as far as I know. Does anybody know anything about that?
That'll be something important for us to have a conversation with the planning department, city council, whoever would be in the know there. Okay.
I really hate to see, the one thing about dividing neighborhoods, keeping all the neighborhoods together, I see the logistics of it, of course. I really don't want to see schools be the haves and the have-nots, or, you know, the school on the other side of the track. That just,
And that's
breaks
why
my
you're,
heart.
that's why you're
Kids being
here.
separate.
Because there may be some easy geographic lines to draw because of highways, because of roads, because of things like that. When you put it into 5 maps, you may look at that and go, we never could do that based on our conscience. And so that's why we have all these tools, and yet you have to start somewhere. And so that's why I threw out the question to say, okay, where's some obviouses? And as we look at criteria, you know, keeping neighborhoods together is one of your options that you're going to turn around and prioritize. And so that may, if that ends up high, then we'll do everything we can to try to not split up neighborhoods in any way. And logistically, you know, it may work out that way anyway. So I appreciate your input on that. Let's look ahead and wrap this thing up. At our next meeting, we're going to go through the consensus decision-making process on priorities. We'll look at the PSU demographic study. We'll start looking at 5 maps actually with some lines in it and seeing how things start dividing out one way or the other. And we have a whole bunch of information we're going to dump into a place to where you can start kind of sifting through and educating yourself on, you know, the PSU study and the different things that we've outlined already. Anything else, Rob, that you have?
You know, I know that the last meeting we talked about has what kind of communication has taken place to make sure that people are aware of this. And based on the 400 surveys you got back, there obviously was some communication that took place. And I just want to thank all of you who were part of that and congratulate the district on getting that survey out, getting it back. Really nice piece of work, and the communication that's been taking place, and also just how thoughtful you all have been on this. Randy and I understand process, but we don't understand your community. And it may frustrate you a little bit, but in some ways it's really good that we don't understand your community, or, you know, are part of it sometimes, because we can say things and think about things sometimes in a way that would be really hard for you all to do that. And so I hope that help is a help as opposed to a hindrance, and that we have all of you to help us with the knowing the community piece that can help balance that as we work about making the decision. But lastly, we're going to put a bunch of information, you know, in your hands, all the different information that we talked about, the available information sources. And I would just really encourage you to dig into some of that because we're going to be relying on you for this very important decision-making and recommendation. And the more of that that you are able to digest and have at your fingertips as we begin to manipulate with 5 maps, the better decision-making that we're gonna do. And in the meantime, I think our next meeting is the 7th.
Yeah, January
7th. So we've got a bunch of time between now and then. We'll mess around with this a little bit and see if we can't begin to see some possibilities that we can share with you and get some feedback on, and then continue to manipulate until we get to a place where we think we have something that you can take forward as a recommendation to the board. So thanks for your work on it.
So remember, you'll be getting an email from me, and I'll send it to you individually, so we don't have the problem of reply all and all of that. And I'll ask you to prioritize, and then we'll use that information in order to have steps forward to get to a consensus next time on the criteria. And also information as we put it together. Derek said he's created the place on the district website. It's also up to you to be able to help disseminate that to people in the community. So if you get questions, you can say, hey, go look at the survey results here. You know, you can go through and read them all, or go look at this study or the recommendations that we're starting to make. And that'll help in the whole transparency piece. And so you guys need to be the conduit to help get that out as well as the district. And if you have ideas as to how the district can flood people with that so that everybody's getting the information, make sure you share it with us or them so that we can get it out there. We need to be clear, concise, and make sure that everybody understands what we're doing.
Just a quick
Okay.
comment about that.
Yes.
I agree, especially since it seems like the priority is about getting information out. I have kids at 3 schools, and I did not get a parent square about this meeting here. So I'm wondering, maybe that was thought that it was sent out or sent to other schools, but at Robert Frost, the middle school and the high school, I didn't hear about this meeting other than the fact that I'm on the committee.
Liz, I think what happened is that it was part of the survey messages that we got. It was just kind of like buried down in the survey message.
Oh, I see. Okay, but not a recent one.
But it wasn't a separate one about this meeting. Because when that was said earlier that it went out, I went back and searched my parent square messages because I was like, I don't remember seeing this at all. And it's buried in that survey message.
Okay, so what I was going to say was the suggestion is maybe moving forward in the future is that perhaps it could come from the principal to the parent, or whoever's doing the communicating at the district, send it to the principals to send it on to Parent Square, because they might look at it more if it's rather than the generic district. Sorry, Derek. But that might be a way that we can send it out, or if the teacher or if the principal wants to send it to the teachers, and more specifically, because I think that if we are saying that we're going to be transparent, we really need to get that information out so people have the option and the ability to.
Nice. Very good. Excellent.
Yeah, and I definitely teacher feedback on Parent Square from my parents is just that they get so much on there, they just can't track it all. So I try to be really specific when I send things, that they know it's from me, but I don't know. I know they're trying to filter a lot of information right now. So whatever we think the best way is that they're going to pay the most attention to it. Maybe that is coming right from teachers. I don't know.
Yeah, you both sort of hit the nail on the head. And actually, I was emailing with a couple of other people on this committee earlier during the meeting who also said, oh, yeah, I found it now, or, are there better ways to do this? One thing we've heard a lot from our community this year so far, we hear kind of 2 different messages. One is, please stop sending us so many things. We hear a lot from our teachers. We hear a lot from, and I've told you before, I have 5 kids in the district at 4 different schools. I get a lot of emails from teachers, right? And it can be really hard. So on the one hand, we have people saying, please stop sending me things. Send it to us once. We'll write it down if it's important to us. And otherwise, we don't want to see reminders because we're trying to parse, is this new information? Did we already decide that we don't care about this? Whatever the case may be. And then on the other hand, we hear people who say, because there's so much stuff, we rely on you telling us things because that's how we get reminders. So please continue to send us things. So we're trying to walk a fine line We did, like I mentioned earlier, roll out some changes in addition to this committee's spot on the website now, the district website. We rolled out some new functionality for events that allows people to go in and just see the upcoming couple of events on the web page, and then also look and see months in advance. We're still populating that list. Debbie went through today and put on board meetings, for example. We'll have the long range facilities meetings. And that functionality will also allow people to just add it to their own calendar apps if that's useful to them. So we're trying to figure out ways to make sure that we're both respecting, let's not send this a bunch of different ways, let's not put more work on teachers' plates, but let's try and make sure everybody's aware. We've got a lot of competing interests, but we're going to try and do our best.
Great. And I see a text or a Zoom chat that says, how about an email from school secretaries? Anyway.
Could we also put it on the Facebook page? It feels like a lot of people see it or don't. I mean, I looked today and it wasn't on the Facebook page, but just also for having the actual Zoom links, I think giving it, a couple hours before or that day, the link, I think it helps people to not have to go search it and give up and, you know what I mean? So I think putting it on the Facebook page, I think would help too.
Yeah, part of that new event functionality that we have will eventually actually sync over to Facebook. We're not there yet, but that's the goal. So
great one.
Okay, really good insight, input. Great job tonight. I appreciate you giving me your time this evening and for the input you provided and for the steps as we move forward. Our next meeting will be on the 7th of January, and there'll be some information come to you in the meantime, but hope you all have a great and safe holiday season, and we look forward to seeing you then. All right. Thank you very much.